Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Punch, Kick, Choke Chat. My name is Sean Benson. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm so happy to be here tonight chatting with Sensei Perry William Kelly. We had a little technical glitch the last time, and we ended up having an impromptu host chat, which we don't mind, but we're way happier when we have our guest here, and it's really nice to see you tonight, Sensei.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I want to jump right into a question with you. We start our show with a bit of a deep dive on something. So you teach Homeland Security defensives, correct?
Well, I trained at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, which is part of Homeland Security. Way back when I was with Correctional Service, I went and took their Instructor-Trainer course to see what the U.S. had to offer and what we could bring back to Corrections Canada in the way of training. But since that time, they completely revamped their training, since I was there. They had when you were, searching people, they had 5 groin checks, and if anything's going to set somebody off, you start going in there 4 or 5 times, you're going to have people jumping way off base. So it was a guy by the name of Tony Lambrea, who was my classmate, ended up being the head of that particular department, and he totally revamped the system. And now he's in private enterprise, but he totally revamped the system and made it much, much better.
Okay, right on. So I have 2 questions for you around that, but you just prompted the first one. What did the U.S. have to offer? I mean, we had one of our guests talking about going back to World War I, how incredible the Canadian military and the Canadian, armed forces are in terms of that big picture relative to the world forces. But when you went down, what did you find the U.S. had to offer that was different? And then we'll get into the second question.
Well, in the U.S., every federal government department has their own police force. Department of Housing, Health and Welfare, they each have their own police service. And all of those police services for the federal department, along with other federal agencies that you'd be aware of, go through either Glencoe or Artesian Wells out in New Mexico. So they have hundreds of, thousands and thousands of individuals going through so that they can reframe and rechannel their training so they can weed out what works and what doesn't work. Whereas in Canada, we have, say, Ontario Police College, we have Nicolet for Quebec, and then we have, say, the RCMP Academy out in Depot in Saskatchewan. So we don't have the massive numbers of students to refine. We have great quality instructors at each of these institutions, but you don't have the massive database of students that you can look at to get feedback as to what's working and not working with students. So that's what I noticed immediately.
So sheer sample size lets you figure out what's more effective more quickly.
Yeah.
So my second question, and this is something I'm really interested in, you're taking a martial art, which is something we practice within our dojo and, us and our instructor, and we do a lot of solo time. But when you scale it up and you're looking at those systems, like let's take something like Homeland Security, or let's take the Canadian versions of these things, when you're teaching these defensives, how do you find the being a martial artist scales up to provincial or national security?
Well, as I was talking to the participants before we went on air, I have had the luxury of one of my past students becoming a master in close quarter combat sambo. And I've actually started as his student. And he's a former undercover drug police officer from Toronto. And I've been teaching, Filipino martial arts for 30 years. And I've completely revamped the way I train knife self-defense, because I found the Kali that I was taught being too flowery, too martial arty. And what I was seeing in the close quarter combat sambo was a better mousetrap, a better way of doing things. And this is what I find is sometimes as martial artists, we get caught up in the concept of the art form and we lose the martial or warlike aspect of it. And you can see it when guys get into, for example, the BJJ sporting aspect of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And they forget you're going to be rolling around on the pavement. That's not a padded mat. Some other guy can kick you in the head while you're trying to get an arm bar. You might have, multiple people, hidden weapons. you're used to rolling around, but the guy out of the blue sticks his hand in his pocket looking to access a folding knife. Unless you've trained for that, you're not going to spot that if you've only done no-gi or gi BJJ. So those sort of things. We get too caught up in what we're used to doing, which is martial art or sport combatives, and we lose sight of the self-defense. Even Hickson Gracie is now revamping what he's teaching in BJJ to make it more self-defense oriented.
And so have you in any way looked at, sort of kata or patterns? I know you started in Shito, and we'll talk about that in your introduction, but have you looked at those and either shed moves, or have you just dug differently into the bunkai?
Well, everything has a purpose. Every movement is something that I consider, or every art form that I've said is a tool in my toolbox. So I never shed anything. I try and blend things together. It's like I say to my Muay Thai students, like, what if you were, instead of trying to do a Muay Thai kick to the inside of the thigh, what if you took a French fouetté and kicked with the ball of your foot to the inside of the leg, right? Or what if you do, you pull your Muay Thai round kick and then do a karate side kick? I mean, use every tool at your disposal and layer them, like Guro Dan Inosanto taught me. Borrow from every martial arts. He used to say, it's like music. You learn notes, then you learn to play, and then you learn to compose music. And this is how I look at blending the arts together.
So let me jump to you, Sensei Dauphin. Let's talk about the idea of, is there any aspects of floweriness that we should shed, or do we just apply bunkai to it to make it work when we're looking at martial arts styles?
So I have a couple of thoughts on that I wrote down. One is you need to have a good teacher, right? And your teacher is going to set your mindset. They're going to set your mindset for what you may or may not confront. And then technique and training is going to prevail. If you got the right mind and you got the right technique, right? I guess one of the things, I don't want to be too contrary, but training for the most extreme situation is great. Like, I do BJJ. I gotta be honest, when I go in, I don't often think about like being on the pavement and rolling around with 2 or 3 people at a time. But I know that my mindset has already been set. It was set 35 years ago by Sensei Legacy that, you got to fight, right? Mm-hmm. So I've got that mindset. So I kind of feel like if I'm on the pavement, my level of training, maybe not a wipeout level of training, maybe not in your first 5 years, that's not going to prevail, but we're all on the path, and we just want to stay on the path and keep getting better with our technique and our mindset and our training, right? And I think
I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's like my sport BJJ game is not very good because I spent all the time with Sensei George Sylvain saying, like, how do you get out of this hold? Well, you stick your thumb in his eye, or you bite him, or you grab his groin, and that's how you get out of that particular hold. There was no transition to position to locking, what you see in traditional BJJ. So, I've never worked on the sport aspect of my ground game because it's always been all the things that are outlawed in sport jiu-jitsu. So, so it's one of my games that I'm trying to develop later in life, so I can roll with other people and not get kicked out for fouling.
I want to jump in on that again, Sean. So one of the things I just want to say about sport karate, sport judo, sport BJJ is a really good thing is, even though you're in the rule set of that, you're training probably and competing against somebody who's a high level athlete. Like somebody who's like, their mindset is to win. Their mindset is technique. Their mindset is something different than somebody who just wants your watch, right? And that's extreme. I don't want to say that's not relevant, but that person who wants your watch probably doesn't have that technique. They probably don't have that athleticism. They probably don't have those things, right? So both sides of it are really important to contemplate.
It is. You make a valid comment. And also, when you're grappling, it's for real. When you're sparring with gloves on, it's for real. You're making actual contact. So it's developing those attributes of space, conquering space, distance, hitting, trying to use an actual body to accomplish your goals. So I call it, or what others call it, sharpening your tools, making sure that all your tools are sharp and preparing to go, because I don't want to seem, playing down people, but there's a lot of people that get a black belt and then sit on their butt for the next 30 years saying, I'm dangerous, Charlie. I can't do a technique because I'd kill you. Instead of stepping on the mat and sparring regularly. And I still spar regularly with all my students, and I can't do the stuff that I used to do 35 years ago, but I can still hold my own. And that's because I'm still sparring, and still trying to keep my game up, so that, God forbid, I have to use it in a street encounter. At least my timing, my reflexes, my cardio, my power will be there, as opposed to somebody who, gets a black belt and then lives on that reputation for the next 25 years.
I love that. I think so many people out there have leveled up too, in a way that the thing that might have worked 25 years ago. So many people have been hit way more than we think now through kickbox clubs, Muay Thai clubs, all that kind of thing. Sensei Suino, let me go to you with this idea. When over time stuff that maybe once was flowery reveals itself, do you shed it, or do you just deepen it with bunkai? You're someone who really took stock of what your teacher gave them and decided what to keep and what not to keep. I'm using the idea of flowery because I like the way Sensei said that. Where do you go with all that?
Yeah, that's interesting. My roots are growing up in a tough neighborhood and having to fight 3 times a week on my way home from school, and then going into sport judo, and then going into karate, and then all the other stuff. It's not, you're not fighting. You're not training when you're training in martial arts, even if it's a sport martial art, right? There's definitely, in my humble opinion, there are definitely martial arts that are, excuse the big words, but they're bereft of martial value. Unless we're not talking about those, or at least I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about martial arts that are basically sound, but that you may have some techniques that are, I don't know, what would you call them? Pure kata or demonstration techniques. You're not training. Unless you only do the flowery stuff and you never do the hardcore stuff, you're still, as Randy said, going to be so much better than somebody who's not trained, that I don't know how much difference it makes. The more I think about it, the more I think that mindset is the fundamental differentiator. There are people that have that killer mindset, that if you have it and your martial art is fundamentally sound, I think you're good.
Well, let me give you an example of what we came across in training police officers when I was at the, in criminal justice, is you get what we were getting as a recruit who probably was not involved in combat sports, may have been involved in some sort of contact sport, football or wrestling or something like that, or, some sort of martial art, but probably not. And so then you get them and you put them through anywhere between 6 weeks to 6 months, which is the outside of the 5 months, 6 months at the RCMP Academy. And you juxtapose that to an offender who's come up through the system where they've been sexually abused, they've been through juvie, they've had to fight and all the way through. And you put those two random variables together in an alley one night, and everything goes from 0 to 60 in the blink of an eye, and the offender will bite off the officer's nose or ear so they don't go back to jail. And that's a very rude awakening for a middle-class kid who's in a police officer uniform and doesn't know how to handle that. So, you can prepare them for that as best you can, but you have to ramp up the training so that they get that survival mindset that you're talking about. And for the esteemed panel that we have before me, I know that it took you, depending on your background, it may have taken you a week to get that, a couple of years, many years, depending on your background. But for the average recruit that I was seeing, you know, it was a big jump because they were looking for college educated individuals or university educated individuals that had no criminal records. They were probably not exposed to that kind of violence growing up.
You know, it's interesting you say it. It brings to mind, you know, as I mentioned, I grew up in a rough neighborhood and I had to fight a lot. And then when I went to high school, I moved into, you know, I went to an upper middle class high school with none of the stuff that I grew up in. And my first couple of years, you know, I ended up hitting a lot of people really fast, kind of having fine-tuned that aggression that you're talking about, you know, in the mean streets of Ann Arbor, such as they were at the time, whereas everybody else had never experienced anything like that. So people would just say a couple cross words and throw a fake fist at me. And I'd hit them really hard once or twice, and that was it. And they were shocked. Like you said, I mean, you could see the shock on their faces. What just happened? I thought we were having a friendly argument, but I was, you know, like you said, I was wired to fight in a few seconds, you know?
Well, funny story comes to mind. I was in forensics class in law school, and for the fingerprint section, they were passing around a semi-automatic pistol that was used in a robbery. So I look at the evidence tag and I go, "Hey, I know this guy," because it was a guy I grew up with, and all these silver spoon kids that grew up in, you know, with wealth and prosperity were all looking at me like I came from Mars, you know, because I knew this armed robber. It was kind of humorous at the time.
Nice.
Hey, Ben,
yeah.
one thing I want to say before we move on too far is that a criminal mindset and a warrior mindset are two separate things.
True.
Right? Those are two separate things, right? Criminals are looking for something, they're looking for an easy way, and maybe they're willing to fight for it. But a warrior's like taking a higher path and they're training for a different purpose, right? So we shouldn't conflate those two mindsets.
Well, in policing, they call them, there's sheep, there's wolves, and then there's sheepdogs. So I equate martial artists and police officers as sheepdogs. They protect the weak. They stand up for each other. They stand up for society. And that's, you know, I lump them together because they train people to stand up for themselves, you know, when there's no alternative and you can't walk away from a situation, and you have to become physical when you can't talk your way out of a situation.
Right on. And also, Sensei Nofe, you've always said, you know, often the most dangerous person is the one willing to engage. And I think we're talking about that there. And I've clocked that. The people who want to fight, I don't know how good they are at fighting, but they're the ones I don't want to be near. Unless it's what you're describing, Sensei Kelly, the sheepdog. Hachi Legacy, what about you? You know, I want to finish with you on this concept of, you know, over 50 years in this, you must have been like, that feels a little flowery at some point, or maybe not with our martial art, but with ones you've seen. And do you think it's good to shed those things, or do you think that they're there for a reason and you find a bunkai or a meaning for them?
Well, to start with, don't forget where martial arts came from. People killed each other, cut their arms off, you know, and somebody who's only been in during peacetime will never know any of those until that happens to them. You know, it has to happen to you. You don't know what it feels like until you've been in a car accident. So that's basically the same thing. Martial arts are military arts at a street level. That means like they didn't do them solely in dojos back in those days. If the Okinawans went home and got to be in their bed at night, they were lucky. Because a lot of times, like Chatanyar just buried this samurai on a beach. You know, it's sort of like that. It's pretty gruesome. The problem there lies in the senseis today. I say that usually, you know, 80 to 90% of the martial arts dojos are phonies, the sense of the word being they didn't stick to the classical ideas, and they didn't mock what they did and the stories that they told us during their time that was passed on. Okay. Another thing about not wearing gloves, if you're wearing gloves and heading a bag, I personally, with all respect, to me, that's not real. If you hit the bag bare hands, or say you hit it fighting somebody in the street and you're bare hands and you're not wearing gloves and you injure your hands, what then? You know, so there's a lot of different looks at that. You need to get used to building your hands up. Yeah, punching the bag is going to save you from roughing your knuckles up a little bit. And we don't have to face people to save our lives most of the time nowadays, right? And then, the last thing I'm going to say is, anything weak in the martial arts that came through would not have survived the test of time. A lot of good martial artists would have cast aside what doesn't work. So that's just my opinion.
Thanks, Hanshi. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Punch, Kick, Choke Chat. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe, hit that like. We're so happy you're here. If you're listening on podcasts, we're so happy you're driving safely, and or maybe you're in your kitchen baking, and we're so happy you're doing that too, and we hope it tastes great. But if you're here on the Zoom show, you're with us and you're part of this living history, and we're so happy you are. We have a chat button at the bottom of the screen. So when you have questions for Sensei Kelly, you can just type those in there and they'll get passed on to us. And we're so happy that you can do that, because that way you funnel your thinking and your questions into our broader sense of what this is. But I also want to introduce our hosts. I'm here with Sensei Randy Dauphin, Sensei Nicolas Suino, and Hanshi Gary Legacy. And, you know, something came up in our chat beforehand. And even Sensei Kelly mentioned it in our first little bit talking, which is the idea that he became a student of one of his teachers. And I just want to say that of the 4 hosts on this, we all have experience in arts, that while our sensei student path is so clear and none of us are in doubt about it, every one of us then will offer something in an art that the other can benefit from. And I just want to say how much of an honor it is to be a part of a sensei student train, but one in which we also offer everything we have in both directions. And it's a really beautiful thing. And I also want to say, you know, the first 10, 15 minutes of this has felt so much more like a conversation than an interview. And I love that. Punch, Kick, Choke Chat is designed to be a conversation, and the interview format is just to hold it together. And so, Sensei Kelly, it's a real pleasure to start this chat with you, and also you, Senseis. I'll throw it to you, Sensei Dauphin.
For the intro, is that what I'm doing now?
Indeed it is.
Amazing. I'm always excited, Sensei Kelly, to do. I already told you I did some research on you. And while Sensei Kelly and I have talked on the phone a few times, honestly, this is our first time chatting, like looking at each other and chatting, and I'm really excited about it. I know it's going to be a great conversation. So if I get anything wrong, Sensei Kelly, you can fix that in a moment. Okay. So Sensei Kelly is a 6th Dan in can-ryu jiu-jitsu. We all know can-ryu jiu-jitsu. We all know where it came from, or at least the hosts all know. He's a certified instructor in karate, muay thai, Dan Inosanto's Kali, and Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune, and John Fan. He's an active martial artist for 55 years, if I got that right. Also, a thing I want to mention, he's a martial arts journalist, an author, a professor, and like one other person on this call, he's a lawyer.
Oh, don't say that. Don't say that. Everybody hates lawyers.
But not me. It's not me, so you don't have to hate me. So that's the good thing about that. He's fully trained correction SWAT operator and a graduate of the U.S. Homeland Security's Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, Defensive Tactics as an instructor, 3-time international competitor, so 3-time international gold medalist in the World Police and Fire Games, and has won numerous other high-level awards. You know, Sensei Kelly, Hanshi Montalvo is going to be here next week, and he also competed in those games and won in the past. In Calgary is where he competed. Sensei Kelly has written biographies for some of the greatest martial artists in modern history, like Dan Inosanto, and one of our all-time favorites on this show, who we just had dinner with last week, Jean-Yves Therriault, the champ, the only champ in Canada, Jean-Yves Therriault. I always like to give a few thoughts. You know, as a journalism, right? I watched an interview and he said, better details and not just promoting the fight, but the individual, but better details, right? Like when you're a journalist, you're trying to provide more details than just a video snippet, right? So much more than that. Another thing I thought about a person like Sensei Suino or Sensei Kelly, when you're writing things down, or Sensei Legacy, all authors, so Sensei Legacy, Sensei Suino, Sensei Kelly, all authors, when you're writing things down, that kind of shows a passion outside of the floor, right? It's a lot of work. You got to do something. It's a lot of work off the floor. And it shows care for our community, right? And something that you want to contribute and last forever, right? And the last thing I'll say is, I know it shines through already. Sensei Kelly's a really smart individual. He's very intelligent. And one thing I learned in the beginning with Sensei Legacy was he always said, I'll take the smartest guy over the most athletic guy every time. And Sensei Kelly's definitely a smart guy. And I'm really happy and proud that we could finally get him on Punch Kick Choke Chat. So thanks so much, Sensei Kelly, for coming on tonight.
Thanks for having me. I really do appreciate it.
So Sensei, let's jump right in. What was it like for you growing up, and what brought you into your first martial arts club?
Well, you know, I wrote this, or a piece was written about me in Martial Arts Success magazine. And I said that I actually woke up as a 3 or 4-year-old to the sound of my dad and his roommate, who was the #1 DJ in Ottawa, conditioning their hands against the stone and brick fireplace. They were students of Andre Langelier, who opened up the first karate school in Ottawa. And he was a student of Ari Anastasiadi from Montreal, a Shotokan man who had studied with the great masters in Japan. He had actually been at when Mazoyama was killing the bulls in Japan. So I had the luxury of also training with Ari as a teenager. But as a 3-year-old, waking up to the sound of them conditioning their hands against the fireplace. My dad started teaching me the rudiments of karate as a 5 and 6-year-old, and then as a 9-year-old, I started taking class in Chudo-ryu karate at Langelier School.
Great. And what can you tell us about what that class felt like, and when you first realized that this is something you're going to be doing for a long, if not infinite, period of time?
Well, I had the luxury of being there when Dr. Chitoza, the founder of the system, came to Ottawa in 1967. And I was just commenting on Facebook. Somebody posted a picture of that with many of the masters who were there, Maz Soroka, Andre Langelier, Fern Claroux, a lot of people who passed on. And Mamoru Yamamoto, the All Japan champion, came in our class. Now, at that time, Japanese people were very short, and seeing him at 5'11" with long flowing hair down to his shoulders, wearing Japanese geita, so he's about 6'2", wearing a long flowing gray robe. I said today, he looked like a Japanese superhero, like a manga action hero. And it just literally, there was a collective gasp in the room when he walked in. And it was something so magical for me as a 10-year-old, just to see him. I just fell in love with the art at that time.
And tell us about what you can about Dr. Chitose.
Dr. Chitose was a medical man. He was, I believe he was a gynecologist, and had put together 2 Okinawan systems to come up with Chito-ryu. And slender, very small man, but his technique was just flawless, absolutely flawless. And I remember seeing him, and the execution, there was just perfection in the execution, that he could take this hulking mass that was Yamamoto, and looking back on it, just by the movement of his hips and body displacement, move him off balance as if it was nothing. And it brings chills to me that it was like I was there yesterday witnessing it.
And then, so you had this sort of Shotokan influence, but then the Chito-ryu as well?
Well, the Shotokan was what Andre Langelier originally studied. Then he went over to Chito-ryu, and Chito-ryu was basically the system in the Ottawa-Gatineau area for many, many years. that was the foundational system in our area. And that was my jiu-jitsu instructor, Sensei George Sylvain's karate system. And I studied at his karate school when I was a teenager, and then went into his jiu-jitsu system after that.
So that's a beautiful segue. Tell us about your time with Professor Sylvain and the work you did there.
Well, Professor Sylvain was a riddle wrapped in an enigma, you know, with a puzzle overcoat on. He was probably the most physically imposing of men you'd ever want to meet, but he was such a visionary that, you know, he had, for when we started kickboxing in Ottawa, he brought in Ron the Bomb Desjardins, a former Golden Gloves person, to work with us, who actually knocked out Paul the Investment Nielsen in 1975, who was ranked number 3 as a boxer in Canada in a kickboxing versus boxing match. And he revolutionized our training, keeping our karate leg attacks with boxing fundamentals, which we see now in modern day kickboxing. So, you know, he asked us to be part of the burgeoning group of kickboxers while I was a jiu-jitsu student of his at that same time.
And did you get to know Hanshi Tarian throughout that period, or do you know him through the circles later, or at all?
Well, interestingly enough, Sensei Sylvain closed down his club when I was at the blue-brown belt level, and he sent me to Hanshi Tarian to get for my black belt. And as I say in the Iceman biography, going as a brown belt in a very, very tough side of town in Vanier, in this small little club that was right beside a Chinese food restaurant. And it was like getting jumped into a gang. Like, they really tried to hurt me that first night. Like, they were serious about putting it to me. And I held my own. So afterwards, they, you know, took me in and said this university kid was okay. And, you know, I stayed there until I, you know, got my Shodan, and I was accepted by them. And there were quite a cast of characters, criminals, tough guys, legitimate tough guys. I dislocated a guy's shoulder that night, and he just snapped it back into place, and he wanted to keep fighting. So I knew what I was up for.
So let's talk about that. Let's actually jump into this and go around the horn on it. You just said a great phrase, legitimate tough guys. Now, we talked in the beginning about people who are willing to engage you, but might not actually be a warrior. But what is that thing that makes someone, in your estimation, Sensei Kelly, a legitimate tough guy? Because that's a cool phrase, and I think a lot of people watching will.
Well, today with what we have is a generation of keyboard warriors that think that they can write anything online and there's no repercussions, or say anything in public and fluster and be rude and have no manners and can use profanity up in people's faces. Now, we have a whole generation of people that think that they can do that without consequence. And unfortunately, you'll run into some people who will go from the verbal, which people call woofing, to biting in a heartbeat. And those are the legitimate tough guys that I think Sensei Dauphin was talking about. People who will make that jump from, you know, being, you know, just talking and trying to act tough to legitimately being tough, and will go get physical in the blink of an eye.
Thanks for that, Sensei Dauphin. Let's jump to you on that. What do you think makes someone in the martial arts a legitimate tough guy, if that's a thing we can even say?
Okay, well, because you said in the martial arts, so
let's do both. Sure.
So I think if you're a martial artist and you have the right mindset, I'm going to go back to mindset. I think it's easier to be a tough guy, but it's the 21st century, a tough person. Anybody can identify as a tough guy if you want, right? So we don't care. Anybody can identify as a tough guy. We open the door to everybody. But the one thing I would say that I like that Sensei Kelly said was consequence, right? And I would expand upon that by saying a tough guy is going to make you pay a price. When you try and do something, they're going to bear weight against you mentally, physically, spiritually. They're going to bear the weight against you, and you're going to have to either rise up against it or crumble, right? That's, you put your hand out and you grab them by the shirt. Think of a tough guy that you know. What's going to happen when you grab a hold of them by the shirt? Tough guys are going to respond, and there's going to be a consequence for that. You start lipping off to a tough guy, your mouth is running. There might be a consequence for that, right? You might not like that consequence, and you probably won't if you're facing a tough guy.
And you never know who you're going to be talking to. And unfortunately, we have a whole generation of men and women, or how they identify themselves, whichever, that think that they can say whatever they want to whoever they want without consequences. And when I was teaching, doormen, I used to say, there's no reason for you to become extra violent with them and lay a beating on somebody, because 6 months from now, you will never remember what they look like. And they're going to come up and take a sharp edge weapon and air hole you some night, and you'll never see them coming. And you're just going to end up, because it's happened to friends of mine who are doormen, walking out of the club late at night and all of a sudden get a shovel across the face and have no recollection of what that guy looked like, because they had filled their dance card 6, 8 months, a year before, And this is the thing. You never know who you're speaking to. That person might have just got out of jail, might have just had a bad day at work, and they just flipped that switch and you've crossed their path,
Absolutely. And let's go to you with that, Haunchy Legacy, because you often say that you never know who you're standing across. And, what do you think makes a person in or outside of the martial arts a tough person?
Well, just to keep it short, people who are willing to fight, win or lose, and whether they're injured or not. And I'll put it in another way is, if you fight with a bully, they won't come back, even if they beat you, because they don't want it. They want it to be easy on them, right? And if somebody ever attacks you and you lose a fight, but you're a tough guy and you give them a good fight, a good showing, they sort of fear you or respect you a little bit. Being a tough guy isn't always the winner, in my opinion.
Thanks, Haunchy. Sensei Suino, where do you go with this idea?
Well, definitely, when I think a tough guy, it's somebody who's not going to back down. But the other interesting thing about that is there are certain human beings, and I think we all know a few, who just don't respond to pain the same way everybody else does. We had Haunchy Steve Uslis on the show. I suspect he's one of those guys that takes a lick and he keeps on ticking. I've had a couple people in my dojo. I got a good buddy, Bill Robinson, who hasn't been doing martial arts for a while, but in his life, he's a guy who, cut one finger off with a circular saw, put on a bulletproof vest and tested pistols to see if the thing was worth what he paid for it, and bounced it at clubs, and he could take a lick and it just keep coming. Like, there's a certain category of human being that just doesn't feel pain, and they don't always look as pretty as the the guys with third degree black belts, but they're like bulldozers. And if you meet somebody that has the attitude, that mindset, the tough guy mindset, and is impervious to minor pain, you got a handful. That's a real tough guy, in my opinion. There's
a fine line there, Nick. Guy's gonna let you shoot a gun at him.
He's a prince among men. I absolutely love that guy, but he's made some questionable decisions along the way.
I just want to add one thing there, that there's the toughness in the moment that has been so well addressed, but there's the toughness of coming back tomorrow and the day after. And that's like a solo fortitude where no one's necessarily challenging you, to get up and hear the alarm go off and just go do the thing. And I find that the people I know who do that in the martial arts, they're weirdly tough when you're fighting them, and you're like, oh, right, because they know what it's like to just wake up sore and go again. It's a really beautiful thing.
Hey, Benz, are you even a martial artist if you've never been injured and gone to the dojo? Are you even a martial artist?
I don't even know if you could. I mean, how would you even call yourself that?
Black Belt Magazine actually had an article in the 70s where they took the x-rays of like Benny Urquidez and, to say, show what their hands look like, and they said, you know, like, these are the top 5 competitors, and here are their X-rays. You know, it was kind of cool article.
I love that. There's a great documentary called The Smashing Machine about Mark Kerr.
Mark Kerr, yeah.
Oh, and the opening scene is him and the doctor, and they're just talking about the bolts in his body and the pins in his body, and the woman's just looking at him like, what is going on? And he's like, and he's the most soft-spoken guy. He's like, I compete in full contact martial arts, and she has no idea how to comprehend it.
I was just watching a video of a friend of mine, Eric Paulson, who was a world Shudo champion. He's the master of 1,000 locks, trained Brock Lesnar.
Badass.
Talking about when they rebuilt his neck a couple of years ago, and he had like 3 or 4 you know, compressed vertebrae or you know, crushed vertebrae, and they put all sort of junk in his neck, you know, pins and bolts and stuff. And he goes, yeah, I can still, you know, do a couple of things, but people go, wow, he's really stiff. Well, they have no idea of how much damage he picked up over the years from competing.
Yeah, that's a legit man. We'd love to get him on the show. So let's talk about the next number of steps in your journey. You know, you've got this jiu-jitsu you've begun, you're training in karate. What brings you to the point where you're starting to write about things and you're starting to instruct others?
Well, when I had finished my law degree, I went into criminal justice with Public Safety Canada, and started working in corrections. So at that time, I wanted to do Filipino Kali. So at the time, with the Bob Carver, Adjunct Bob Carver, who was a student of Guro Dan Inosanto, he was teaching Muay Thai at the same time, and I had already done kickboxing. So I really didn't want to do Muay Thai, but you had to do Muay Thai to do the Kali. So at 31, I was sort of, you know, at past my kickboxing career, but I stuck it out, and I became a crew in Muay Thai, and under Guro Dan Inosanto, became involved in Jeet Kune Do and in Kali as well, and started teaching those arts as well.
What can you tell us about Guro Inosanto?
Well, it would take most of this show and probably a couple of others, but he's still teaching at age 87. He's still doing seminars around the world. He still takes a daily BJJ lesson with one of the Machado brothers, probably Jean-Jacques, every day at 87. He started, I think he was 60 when he started BJJ, and he's like a 4th degree black belt now. He is an absolute encyclopedia of martial arts. He's, you know, I've lost count of how many martial arts and martial artists he studied with over his life. You know, Bruce Lee being the most famous of which. And I'm learning new stuff about him every day. I just read a new book, or not a newish book, on Bruce Lee, talking about when they were doing demonstrations in 1964 in San Francisco around the same time as the famous Juan Jockman fight. And I'm learning new things about what happened at those demonstrations. But he's just an amazing man, very, very humble, much like Jean-Yves Theriault. When I asked both permission to write a biography about them, they both sort of said, well, who'd want to read about me? And I'm like, who'd want to read about you? You're a living legend, you know?
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the biography for Jean-Yves Theriault. What brought that about? And was there anything that, you know, came up that was interesting or quirky or fun during that time?
Well, you know, Jean-Yves Theriault is very laid back, as you know. He is, you know, self-deprecating. I always say he's like Larry Holmes who came after Muhammad Ali. He came after Bill Wallace, who was, you know, bigger than life, you know, very glib and articulate. And he's the humble Canadian. He's the humble Canadian, and never got his real actual due that martial arts fans should recognize him for his greatness. All those knockouts with both hands, both feet. So I said to him, you know, I want to write a biography so that people know how good you were at your best and what a great guy you are and how hard you had growing up, and just want to put all that together between 2 covers. And he was like, you think people would really want to know about that? And I said, absolutely. and he was very, very giving of his time over the year that we spent putting the book together.
Did you get moving around with him at all?
I know well enough to not poke the bear. In fact, I was training, and I'll tell this story. We were training one night at Theriault Jiu-Jitsu, and we were kickboxing, and it was like, okay, do we have enough people to spar? And I was like, oh, we don't have enough people. And Jean-Yves said, oh, I'll fill in. And one of the other kickboxers was with him, and all I heard was crack. And I turned around and I saw the guy falling with his nose going like this, you know, and he was just KO'd. You know, it's just like that instinct comes in, and you know, I'm sure he wasn't meaning to hurt him, but he just caught him with a little more power than he probably thought he was throwing. Broke his nose a couple of places and just laid him flat out. I know better than to poke the bear. I just let him hold pads for me, and even then it hurts my hands.
Mm. So I want to get into some of the talk about the interviews you've done, but before we do that, I want to talk about, was this a conscious single choice to become someone who writes and interviews, or is this something that just fell out naturally?
Well, it's crazy because I fell into it because between my second and third year of law school, the person that I articled for, who's passed on, actually wanted me to research a book for him. And after I did all that research over the summer, I asked him if I could use that research as part of some papers I wrote in law school. And I got 3 A's on the papers, and one of them ended up being published. And that started my writing career. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up writing for the RCMP Gazette for 10 years. And I took those articles, which became my first book, The Thinking Officer's Guide to Police Defensive Tactics. So that was my first book, which came from the articles I had written for the RCMP Gazette.
Amazing. So in 2 sentences, we're going to go around the horn to 2 of us on this call, and I'm not one of them. What would you say to somebody who's thinking about writing with regard to their martial arts?
You asking me?
Yeah. What advice would you give them?
Well, you're going into a new age. Black belt has just been sold to a new editor. I think we're seeing the end of print media as we talk. I think everything is going to be digital and online. I think, you know, print magazines are going to go the way of the dinosaur. That's just my own personal belief. I couldn't find over the past year, whether it's Chapters or Indigo or anybody else in Ottawa that would carry a copy of Black Belt magazine. I used to have to get my story shipped from Oklahoma City from Century Martial Arts. There's many outlets out there that are mostly covering MMA, if you're an aspiring writer, but for globally, like a different kind of martial arts per se, pretty slim market out there these days. So you're facing an uphill.
Yeah. Hanshi Legacy, what advice would you give to a martial artist who's thinking about writing things they know about the martial arts?
Well, in whatever way they're going to put it across to everyone, if you have something to say, try to say it. So I don't know anything about promoting books. Nothing.
Right on. Thanks, Hanshi. And the third author on this call, Sensei Suino, what about you? What would you say to somebody who's thinking about writing?
Yeah, I mean, if somebody's inclined to write, they should do it. It helps organize your thoughts. You might be able to preserve some things that you'd forget otherwise. It's a worthy endeavor. But as Sensei Kelly said, selling work, especially in print form now, is not what it used to be. There's a little bit of a resurgence coming now for books. But it's a niche resurgence. I think books will sell for a while. There's still a pretty good number of people who like to hold something in their hand when they read. But if anybody's sitting on this call thinking that they're going to pay for a horse ranch in Texas with the earnings from their martial arts books, they probably ought to find a different way of making the money.
I agree with you totally. There's if I clocked in how many hours I've spent writing about martial arts versus revenue, right? It's in the pennies what I got paid for it. But you do it because, like you say, it leaves a testament for others behind. I think, the coolest thing is going into a library somewhere in Canada and seeing your book on the shelf, and I always say I had the Back to the Future moment. If you remember that movie where in the movie, Biff comes in and goes, "Oh, I've got your box of your books." I actually had that moment where the FedEx driver came and brought me the box of books, and my little toddler of a daughter saw my Dan Inosanto book, and she said, "Daddy, that's your picture." And irrespective if I ever made a nickel more in my life on martial arts writing, that was enough of a moment for me.
Love that. And we love a Biff Back to the Future reference every time. Sensei Dauphin, it'd be disingenuous. Might not have a published novel, but I remember reading essays years going back into the 90s. So what are your thoughts about writing in general about the martial arts? I mean, I remember you sending me an essay topic that no one asked you to write, and it actually stimulated the way I think about martial arts. What do you think writing does for martial artists?
I think one thing I would say is, everybody who gets a black belt in Legacy Sharner has to write a 10-page resume, and everybody in Legacy Sharner has to write at least a 2-page resume with a prescribed topic all the way through. So again, I think you got to be intelligent to be a good martial artist, which means you got to string some words together and put some thoughts on a page that are going to be out there. I just want to say Mario Musso just wrote, he's going for his black belt. He's going to be standing back here. Sensei Legacy is going to be staring at him. He's going to be challenging for his black belt. I know what's going to happen there. I wanted to see what Sensei Legacy says about his resume. It's a really good resume, well written, articulate, good personal thoughts, something that will stand the test of time. Somebody 100 years from now might pick that piece of paper up and read it, and it might change everything for them. So I think it's really important that you can write. I really do. And while I'm not a published author, if you purchase Sensei Legacy's book, you might find some of my words in that book, at least in the first chapter of it. My words about him, right? My 15 or 20 pages that I wrote about Sensei Legacy.
Love that. And, I love what you said, Sensei Kelly, just about it being in the library and that having value. My parents were both professors, and my dad is really big on archives. And that's part of what we're doing here with this show. Before we get to our 10 questions and archive you that way, I do want to ask you about your UFC interview with Renzo Gracie.
Yeah.
Well, Renzo I spoke to over the phone, and then I actually got to meet him at the Bellator fights in Long Island. So I got to meet him in person. Oh, guy, he is one of the funniest guys you'll ever want to meet or interview. And he's trained. I've had the luxury of interviewing Rickson, Royce, and Renzo, and Renzo was by far the funniest. The most cerebral I found to be Rickson, and Royce I got the chance to train with twice, as well as interview. So you get to see different sides of the family.
And if you had to become a student of one, which would you pick?
I think I think I'd go with Rickson, because he has, he brings the aspect as the fighter. He wants to delve into the self-defense aspect of it. And he also brings the spiritual, emotional side of martial arts, that aspect. So it's many dimensions, many layers of the martial arts that he brings to it, it's for me, it was just a joy to interview him and to speak with him.
I bet. I mean, I read his book. I opened it. I got it for Christmas a couple of years ago, and I was done it before the end of the day. Yeah. I couldn't put it down.
Yeah. Myself too.
Yeah. It was riveting. It was deep. And like you said, he's got the actual fight pedigree, no mouth warrior in that guy.
Hey, Benz, though, the thing about Renzo is the one thing I saw him do that I didn't see any other fighter ever do is knock somebody out and then step on their face as he went back to his corner, right?
Well, that's the thing Judo Gene LaBelle did to Milo Savage back in the 60s when they had the judoka versus boxer match in Salt Lake City, Utah, which was the first mixed martial art bout in the continental US.
Wow.
He stepped on his neck after he choked him out.
Do you remember that one, Sensei Suino? Were you watching that as a judo man?
It's still on YouTube. You can see it.
I've never seen that fight. I'm going to look at it now.
The other thing about Henzo is you got to remember he got his arm broke and he still didn't tap out. That's when I call a legitimate tough guy. Yeah, go ahead, break my arm. I'm still not going to tap. You're not going to make me tap.
Yeah, that's what Sensei Legacy said. Are you willing to get injured and keep fighting? Yeah, definitely legit tough guy. Yeah.
When you can actually see him in that same documentary I'm talking about, the Smashing Machine, where he's just fucking around. Like he's just having a great time before those fights, just playing with his opponents and getting in their head. It's time, Sensei, for your 10 questions. We ask that you answer as impulsively as possible. And then if you need to expand, feel free.
Okay.
The first question: what is the most effective move in your martial arts arsenal?
My most effective move is my verbal qualities or my verbal skills. If you can, like in Roadhouse, if you can talk them out, you can talk, they can walk, And the two easiest words to say are, "I'm sorry, forgive me, have I done something wrong?"
Right on. Who is the most, also we love Roadhouse, so anytime you want to drop Roadhouse references, no one's mad. Who's the most influential martial artist in your life?
It's a toss-up between Sensei George Sylvain and Guro Dan Inosanto. George Sylvain for giving me the street combative skills necessary, and Guro Inosanto opening up the richness of blending the different arts together.
Who do you think is the most influential martial artist of all time, and why?
This is going to sound strange, but I'll just say Bruce Lee, in the sense that he's brought martial arts to such a great audience. Now we're looking at the philosophical aspects of what he brought to the martial arts. He categorized methods and ways of attack for us as instructors. And, he just had a global impact on bringing martial arts worldwide.
Right on. What excites you most about the next 5 years of your training?
The next 5 years of my training are going to be on prolonging where I'm at, so that as I move into my 70s, I can maintain the attributes that I have, and hopefully, get better at some of the things that I'm pursuing, like Piper knife fighting and close quarter combat sambo.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you get there?
Well, I believe God's a forgiving God, and that irrespective of what I've done, it was all part of his plan anyway. And he knew what I was going to do, and he ruled what I was going to do before I even did it. So, I wouldn't have to explain myself.
Do you have a fave film and television martial artist, whether they're actual legit martial artists or not?
I love the John Wick series because the director and producers are both instructors from Dan Inosanto's line. But all four of them. I actually wrote a piece for Black Belt about Dan Inosanto and his students being involved in the Jason Bourne movies, Mission Impossible, Batman, and all those. He revolutionized film over the last 25 years.
That's amazing. I did not know that, and that is so exciting. Those movies are so well done, and they've changed how we think about martial arts in terms of even just the weaponry, like the actual way he shoots even. Do you have a martial artist, living or dead, in all of recorded history you'd want to train with the most?
I think I would love to have trained with the original Okinawan masters in the late 1800s, turn of the century, 1920s. before the art was brought over to Japan and the circular movements were taken out and they were more linear. I would like to, where they had just like 8 to 10 students in their yard, as opposed to the Japanese where they would have 50 to 100 students in front of them.
Right on. If everyone in the world could get the greatest benefit you've gotten from martial arts, whether they train or not, what benefit would they be getting?
To renounce violence and be peaceful, and just live your life loving people instead of trying to hurt them.
And our last two questions come as a pair. What is your greatest achievement and what is your greatest regret?
Greatest achievement is my daughter. She's grown up to be a beautiful, strong feminist, and she's a teacher in her own right. And she's an excellent Filipino martial artist. My biggest regret is that, I'm at the, later stages of my life. I'd like to, like Ricky Bobby and Talladega Nights, I wish I could live to be 125, 27 with, modern day science, but I wish I had more time. That's all.
Thanks, Sensei. We'll talk to Sensei Suino because he got the stem cells, so maybe you will get to live to 125, 127. He's going to let us know how those all worked. I want to go back and ask one more UFC question. Then we're going to go to a question that just came in for us. Talk about the first UFC fight in Montreal.
Well, the first UFC fight in Montreal was amazing. In that ringside seats were going for $10,000 with the scalpers. And I got to get there for free, right? My magazine sent me there.
Wow.
If it couldn't have got any better than that, I'm 3 or 4 rows back with press. And my seatmate beside me is a fitness model. And she's sitting there asking me to explain what's going on. So I'm like, okay, I'll tell you what's going on. So it's like a dream fight, dream event. And, it's if I'm not mixing up my fights, it was when GSP fought Matt Serra. And I bought into the hype and I was really rooting for GSP and I wanted him to trounce Matt Serra. And I swear to God, over the noise, I could hear Matt Serra wince every time GSP kneed him in the ribs when they were down on the mat.
Was that 1 or 2 or 3? How many did they do? They just did the 3, right?
Well, that was the second one after he got knocked out with the spinning back fist. So this was the rematch.
Yeah.
But Matt Serra didn't come out on the winning edge.
Ooh, hell of a fight.
Yeah.
Hell of a fight. That sounds like a wonderful time. I would have loved to have been there, sitting right beside you. Although I'll sit on the other side because I don't want to steal your friend. Well,
the coolest part was you get to go into the Montreal Canadiens Directors Lounge for dinner before that. I mean, the UFC couldn't have treated me nicer. While I was there, I actually met the editor for Inside Grappling, which became Inside MMA, and he hired me to be a writer for them as well. So it was a great night all in all.
Your stock just went up because you said the Montreal Canadiens. Sensei Legacy's wearing a Montreal Canadiens sweatshirt right now.
There we go. There we go. Go Habs.
Good.
Question came in from Sensei Copeland. Did you ever serve in the military? He thinks you'd be a great soldier.
No, most of my family have, though. I have my great uncles served in the Second World War. My uncles served in the Korean War, and I had another uncle that served in the 1957 Suez Crisis in Egypt. And my dad was in the Navy as well, but not for me. I had thought about serving in the military, so my dad said, to get you ready, I'll give you this really great job, which was unloading a tractor trailer full of 100-pound bags of flour at 2 cents a bag. So there was 450 bags, so I made $9. So it kept me in school far longer than my parents wanted.
So that pays almost as well as writing martial arts articles and books.
Yeah, just about, yeah.
Talk about Muhammad Ali doing commentary.
Well, that was at just before the 1975 event that Hanshi Theriault, Sensei George Sylvain, and their partner put on in Ottawa. We went down to Toronto where they had a press conference, and they had some of the boxing people there. George Chuvalo, I met George Chuvalo, Canadian legend in boxing, who had fought for the title, fought Muhammad Ali one or two times. He fought twice for the title. And Sammy Lufspring, who was the referee, was the host there. Sammy Lufspring was the referee for George Chuvalo's first title fight, who told George after that he had to rule against him because the mob was going to kill him if he voted in favor of George Chuvalo. So that was kind of interesting. So the fight we went to was, which is depicted in the new George Foreman movie, where George Foreman fought 5 opponents in one night, 3 rounds each. And Howard Cosell was there. Wally Slokey was sitting with us, the legendary Wally Slokey. And Chuck Merriman, legendary Goju karate man. Ron Martin from the States was also there. And down at ringside, Howard Cosell was doing the commentary, and in walked Muhammad Ali. And it was the first time I've ever experienced an electric shock go around the whole of the arena. It was just like, you know, when they do the wave, but it was just like everybody said his name at the same time. And it was an unbelievable feeling. And
then there's something about him walking out, or just that's what you mean?
When he walked out, it was just palpable. His presence and his charisma was just palpable.
Right
People
on.
just, it was electric.
What year was that?
1975.
Right in it, eh?
Yeah.
Right in it. And talk about seeing Superfoot Wallace's first fight and being coached by him.
Well, I was about 15 years old, and he came to Ottawa to fight, and he fought one of my mentors, Webb Corcoran, and he actually, I say, he hit him with too much contact and broke his glasses. Webb and Bill have agreed that it was accidental, so we won't say any more about that. But I got to meet him, years later, and he helped me when I came back to sport karate after a 45-year layoff, and helped coach me. But my real coach was Super Dan Anderson out of the West Coast of the U.S. But seeing Bill at the in 1971 at the height of his his karate phenomena was amazing. The things that man could do at that time before he became a kickboxer, it was just amazing. And then to have him later in life be a coach for me was great, and have him fine tune my game was great as well.
Hey,
So
shout out to Super Dan Anderson, who is our number 3 guest on Punch Kick Choke Chat.
There you go.
Talk about a layoff from sport karate and what made you decide to come back and what that was like.
Well, I was approaching 60. I was in my late 50s, and I said, okay, what sort of physical challenge could I do? I couldn't get him. I wouldn't want to have a kickboxing. I was thinking about a kickboxing fight, but I knew I could go 2 rounds. I knew I didn't have the gas for 3. And depending on, there have been, Jean-Yves Theriault's brother wanted to match me up with a former world champ. And I said, are you crazy? The guy's going to kill me, So I poo-pooed that idea. So I said, what can I do that's within my range of skills? So I went back to, sport karate, which would be minimal contact to the head, full contact to the body. And I said, well, what could I bring to the table? I haven't done this in so many years. And it's sort of, not to liken myself to Ali, but what Ali brought to the boxing game was movement that was different from other boxers of his era. So I thought if I could bring Kali type movement or Muay Thai movement into the karate game, that would give me an advantage, which it did a little bit. And I also used more of a thinking man's approach that I say, which was to study the game and see what worked and what didn't work, which we are only starting to get at the surfaces. The way, like, in Moneyball, where the baseball figured out what are the statistics that work. We're just now, I've talked with people from Karate Canada, they're now just starting to look at what techniques score most often, at what point during the match, at what position on the match. We're just starting to go into that now. And I'm sure the Eastern Europeans are way ahead of us in this.
And how to go looking at it that way? How did you find that compared to when you were younger?
Well, you know, it was, you know, I said to do this, I have to get the best coaches. So I got Bill Wallace, Super Dan Anderson, who basically taught me the best, the most I ever learned about sport karate. And then I got the best sparring partners, which were members of the Canadian karate team, the Rivet brothers, who have their own dojo in Val-des-Monts. And I said, why not get the best kids? And their kids, they're, you know, they were in their early 20s, right? And spar with them. And they showed me what worked at the international level and what would work or not work for me. So that's why I said I tried a thinking man's approach to and applied that, and it helped me have a better game, even though, you know, I hadn't done it for 45 years.
So there's something I wrote down when you were doing your 10 questions, talking about your next 5 years of training and that kind of thing. Staying motivated, you know, you're talking about working on the knife stuff, and here you are, you know, you've got over 50 years behind you. What would you say is the key to staying motivated, or would make you in your late 50s say, hey, I need to go compete right now? When a lot of people are looking back at their trophies, like where did that motivation come from, or how do you nurture it for anyone listening?
Well, I think everybody has to have short, medium, and long-term goals. You know, if you stagnate, you rust, and if you rust, your machine's going to stop, right? So fitness, whether it's martial arts or doing any kind of fitness, you have to make it part of your lifestyle. And just doing things mindlessly is really not the way to go. So I think you should have a goal, be it physical, you know, be it intellectual or whatever. You should have short, medium, and long-term goals. And you have to set yourself challenges of what you want to do over the next period of time. So going back to learning a new art, or learning a new language, or learning something new, just to keep your gray matter active as you get older, and training, but training within reasonable limits. I can't lift as heavy as I used to, nor would I want to, because I want to prolong my joint longevity, you know, and looking at different ways of training smarter, not harder.
Hanshi Legacy, I want to jump over to you with that question. You know, you're someone who, when I met, was already one of the most widely respected martial artists around, but you said, yeah, I've also got to learn White Crane, or I also want to train my sword. What keeps you motivated, and what can keep other people listening motivated and continuing on a path?
Well, like I'm in my late 70s, so I'm not going to try to run any quarter-mile runs or anything like that. But the little working out that I do is in training. When I train the people for fighting or kata, kata will keep your lungs going if you do them properly, So I use the art as opposed to the fighting part of it in a ring, the competition, as opposed to what I used to do when I was younger. And that's basically it.
And I would wholeheartedly agree with Sensei Legacy, because, people always say, oh, kata's no good, kata's no good. Well, what do you think shadow boxing is, right? Shadow boxing is a free flow of movements against an imaginary opponent. Kata is just a prescribed movements against imaginary opponents. And if you do it with speed, focus, power, you're going to get that tremendous workout and keep your joints flexible. You're going to keep, your balance as you grow older. Those things that we need to, strength, bone density, fluidity, balance, all those things. You're going to have to memorize and recall all of those patterns. So kata is invaluable as you grow older.
Yeah, I want to be in really good shape when I die.
People are going to say he looks good in his casket.
Sensei Sweeto, let's pop over to you. What keeps someone motivated when, you could argue physically it might not be as good as when you were 10, 15 years younger? What keeps it going?
Well, as a guy who is intrinsically motivated, it's hard for me to understand why anybody's not. But here's what I've learned in my work with helping people develop themselves. The people they're around make a huge difference. Their physical health makes a huge difference. And then things in the environment make a huge difference. Right. Some people say we make major life changes through inspiration or desperation. And so if you don't have a really positive group around you, inspiring you to try harder, sometimes having a near miss or losing everything or losing something can motivate you as well. But I would say probably the most reliable thing, if we're asking for a prescription, is to be a part of a group of people, like a bunch of martial artists who are always working hard themselves. They say you're the sum of the 5 people closest to you. And if you're doing martial arts, sometimes they're very close.
Right on. Sensei, no offense, what about you? What keeps the motivation going? What keeps you looking at the other arts or trying something new? Why?
Can you hear me? I'm not sure if I'm muted or unmuted. Okay, so I've been coughing, so I've been muting myself and unmuting. I can only speak for today. I like hard. I like to choose the hard path. Tonight I came in, I jump rope 2,000 times. I did 100 pull-ups. I did 50 deadlifts with 225, and then I achieved a 300-pound deadlift, and my body weight right now is 154. I like hard, right? People can always do more than they think they can do, because you set these weird limits in your brain and you tell yourself stories that aren't actually true. Some of them are true, but not all of them. So that keeps me motivated. I like hard. I like helping other people achieve their hard. I like that. That keeps me motivated now as a teacher, to help other people. And yeah, I like achieving my goals or dying to try and achieve them. Like I just like that, right? Like I agree with Sensei Kelly, short, medium, and long-term goals, right? And then just pour yourself into that shit as hard as you can. Like if it's a short goal, it should be achievable. If it's a medium goal, maybe it's not. If it's a long-term goal, less likely, but doesn't matter. Like put it out there. If you put the date on the calendar, you're in a higher percentage of actually achieving that if you put the date there. If you hang the bullseye on the wall and buy some darts, you might hit the bullseye. If you don't do those other 2 things, you're not going to.
Love that. And I've chipped this in before on the show, but I was once told beautifully, a plan without a date is a hallucination. It may as well be 2 a.m. You're on coke in someone's kitchen. Go, we should do this. Yeah, let's do it. Great. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. Sensei Kelly, we're not wound up yet. And I want to make sure by the time we do, it's about you. However, you've interviewed somebody who we haven't really talked about on the show and who I think is one of the most interesting players and characters in the martial arts world, and that's Dana White. And I'd love to know your impressions or how that went, because that's an interesting cat.
Yeah, Dana, I spent a couple of, probably about an hour with Dana over the phone, and ended up being a two-part article for Martial Arts Success, both cover articles. Very interesting guy. I delved into his background, and people may not know that he was run out of Boston by Whitey Bulger and his crew. They wanted he was teaching a cardio boxing course, and one of his associates came up and said, Dana, you're going to have to pay so much to us. And he went back to Las Vegas, where he went to high school and met up with the Fertitta brothers, who ended up buying UFC, and the rest is history. But Dana is a multifaceted guy, very, very multifaceted. People tend to either love him or hate him. From my point of view, I think the UFC underpays their fighters, and I think they have restrictive contracts for them. I think the most telling thing from a Canadian point of view is that one of the UFC fighters from Canada, Rory McDonald, made more money with his first fight with Bellator and sponsorship than he did with his title fight with the UFC. And I encourage most of the fighters that go, oh, I want to go to the UFC. I want to go to the UFC. I tell them you have a very short window as a prize fighter. And if you want to make the most money, you want to look at the 4 other companies, you know, and if you're good enough, the UFC will come calling for you, but you're going to make much more money with One Championship or Bellator, Combat Americanas, you know, or PFL or something like that. They're gonna pay you lots more money. And if you become a champion in those under them, the other company, you have the big companies probably going to come looking for you.
That is such sound advice. I mean, I just want to relate it quickly to acting. Like a lot of people are like, oh, I got to go to LA. And it's like, get big in the smaller pond first, and you'll actually do better when you get there, because they'll call you and they'll say, who's that person working in that town or whatever. And I don't think that gets talked about enough, because everyone thinks the UFC is the ultimate payday, right?
Yeah. Well, they came calling for Adam Beach. You know, Adam Beach, the native Canadian actor, was big here in Canada, and they came calling for him. And I just think about that because I just started studying native Canadian martial art Okichita out at the free in Kanasatake a couple of weeks ago, learning how to use the lance and the war club and the tomahawk and the knife, throwing and also using them in combat, which was very cool to me, being a member of the Ontario Métis Nation, and this being Louis Riel Day today.
So talk a little bit more about that. That seems like an incredible thing that we haven't really gotten into that type of martial arts before. So how was that experience? And, you know, break out open for us.
Well, it was very cool because not only did we learn how to use the weapons, but we also learned battle tactics. For instance, just quickly, on horseback, what they would do is they take the gun stock club and put the lance together with it. So from a distance, it would look like they had more firearms than they had. And that just blew me away from a battle tactics point of view. So currently, I put in a request with the Ontario Métis Nation to get a grant to do research on Métis battle tactics, warrior culture, and warrior training as part of historical research, because I've done, you know, some historical type research on dance and martial arts, looking at capoeira and silat previously.
That sounds fantastic. Sensei, the way we wind up our show, if you've watched, is we go around the horn and we talk a bit about our time with you. But before we do that, there's a couple of minutes if you just want to make sure we haven't missed anything that you want to touch on.
Well, no, I just really enjoyed being here with all of you great martial artists, and I've watched a number of your shows, and I think it's really great work that you're doing. You know, shining a light on masters that you've invited, fighters, and you know, giving an opportunity for people to share their viewpoints. And I'm just really happy to have been a guest here. And that's it.
Well, we really appreciate it. And before we do go around the horn, I have some thanks that I want to put out there. And these are thanks to people who basically keep the show up and running. And it seems that I don't have that pulled up right now. So I'm going to say that afterwards. So let's go to you, Hanshin Legacy, to talk about our time together with Sensei Kelly.
I thought it was quite interesting on a lot of different levels, you know, martial arts, books, interviews. We haven't quite had someone diversified like that. We'll really appreciate you coming on to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hanshi. Sensei Suino?
Yeah, Sensei, I loved it. This conversation went by so fast. I cannot believe that we're wrapping up right now. It was just cool to hear you talk knowledgeably about so many names that you know, that some of whom we know well and some of whom we've just heard about. But you've been in the game a long time. You've known a lot of cool people, obviously learned a lot from those people. And you've chatted about a couple of fights that I haven't seen. So I'm gonna have to get on YouTube tonight before I close my eyes and catch up a little bit. Thanks so much for coming on. I hope we can do this again.
I'd love to.
Thank you, Sensei Suino. Sensei Dauphin?
You know, Sensei Kelly, I always write lots of notes. So I like that you, right off the hop, you talked about black belts who stopped training, right? Like the ones who they were once black belts, right? I'm a bit jealous of you because you're a second generation martial artist. You know, my daughter is like you. Your father indoctrinated you, and that's, you knew nothing else, right? Like, you've just always been involved in martial arts. That's a super cool thing. Honestly, I gotta say, I didn't know that Dr. Chitosi was a gynecologist, but that's, I don't know, that's pretty cool. I like that you got your black belt in Hunchitari in school, right? He's a good friend of ours. We're really well connected to him. So that's something I didn't know. You're a super smart person. Like, I know that your mind leads your body into places, but your recall for dates and people and places is incredible. Like, it's super incredible that you can just, you're talking about these things that they happened yesterday. I can't remember what I ate for breakfast this morning. So it's really cool to hear you talk about that stuff. I like your reverence for Grandmaster Inosanto. Like, it's really clear that he's a special person in your life. Listen, I don't like Larry Holmes, and I love Jean-Yves Theriault. And so that's the only thing I'm going to take exception to. Jean-Yves is a different person than Larry Holmes, although I know you were speaking of historical context. I like to talk about Renzo Gracie and, like, right, like a broken arm and still win the fight. Like, that's crazy, right? Like, something different. Most influential people: George Sylvain, Grandmaster Sylvain, and Don Inosanto. I wish we could have had Grandmaster Sylvain on here. Like, it would have been good to have him on. Most influential: Bruce Lee. Sensei Legacy agrees with you. That's what he said as well when we interviewed him. Movies: I was recently on a plane to Japan and then on a plane back from Japan with Sensei Suino, and I watched Guardians of the Galaxy, all of them. Okay. But I also watched Enter the Dragon, and I also watched all the John Wick movies. So I think we would have enjoyed watching those together. I like that you said you would like to train with people from pre-Japan karate, people like Matsumura and Itosu. Your greatest achievement, your daughter. Me too. Same thing. We share that same thing. I like when you talked about Wally Slokey, Chuck Merriman, Bill Superfoot Wallace, Super Dan Anderson. You talked about Vic Theriault, even though you didn't mention his name. We know all these people. They've all been on here with us, and it's really cool to have somebody on here mentioning the same names. Yeah, and I just want to say the last thing that is short, medium, and long-term goals. It's a simple statement, but it's a really important statement. If you want to achieve anything for a long period of time, you need to continue to have short, medium, and long-term goals. And yeah, thanks for coming on here, Sensei Kelly. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
And I just want to say, now that I've got the names up, I want to say thanks to Alden Adair, Andrei Sedashev, Dridi Guliani, Jesse Villevitao, Josh Kitchens, Justin Shea, Robert Schlumsky, Stavros Stavroulias, Sidney Dauphin, and Daniel J. Holland III. And I just want to add, Sensei, you know, 3 quick things. One is, I just smiled at this, and I don't mean to go dark on this, but the idea that as a kid you woke up to the sound of your dad doing martial arts, and you know, some of us woke up to the sound of our parents drinking and fighting, and it's pretty awesome that you woke up to a different sound. And maybe there was that other stuff I don't need to know, but I just got an excitement for any kid who wakes up to hear their parent doing martial arts in the middle of the night. It's a beautiful thing. Your excitement at all of this, it's so infectious. And, you know, I feel a kinship with you just because I think in some way what you were doing with your articles, and you're saying that print media is maybe not the most current thing. I think what we're doing is trying to be as current as you once were. And, you know, I don't think we're at the breadth of what you did yet, but I think we're trying. And I think we're trying to log something and catalog, you know, the ones who've gone before and are with us now. And I like that you did that. And lastly, you know, this is such a specific thing I'm about to say, but let's say one of our other hosts is talking, the way you listen is so obvious that you're still just a student of all of this every day. And it's a real pleasure to have somebody who's so engaged, not just with what they want to say, but with what whoever's speaking is saying and how they might be able to relate. So I just want to say thanks for that. And the last word goes to you.
Well, like I said, it's a great thing that what you guys are doing, and I wish you luck with continued success with what you're doing. It's a great thing, and thank you for having me on. And if you could just send that message out, always be a white belt, always have this wanting to be a continuous learner, and that's what excites me every day that I can get up, is wanting to learn something new, whether it's martial arts or something else. So thanks very much for having me on.
Thank you so much, Sensei. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll see you next week when we drop one of our shorts, and then we'll be back the week after. We're so excited you're here tonight. Thank you, Senseis.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks, Sensei.
Bye.
Yeah.